Okay, everybody, welcome back. So in this section, section 7, part 4, we're going to take a look at our console or our mixer view here. So join me back here in Studio One. And the way to get to the mixer is quite simple. You come down to the bottom right-hand corner and click on the button called Mix. And here is our console or our mixer view. And you're going to spend a lot of time in Studio One using this. So we'll walk through this and kind of give you the lay of the land here. So as you can see, we have one track, our drum loop from the last section. You'll see it's up here in the console view, and here's our fader that we can move up or down. Okay, so let's start over here on the left hand side of the mixer view, so you can kind of see what goes on here. So over here we have this detach button. If we were to click this, it makes the mixer a floating window, and this is really helpful if you don't want it at the bottom of your edit screen. And let's say you're using a dual monitor setup, you can take this and drag this off the screen onto your second monitor, and you can have your mixer on one screen and your edit screen on another screen, which is really cool. I'm only using a laptop for this recording series, so we're just going to click reattach it again, and it puts it back at the bottom of the screen. You can resize this by just hovering your mouse over here. You'll see the little arrow change into this little different symbol. You can stretch the mixer up or as far down as you want to, depending on what you want to see. Again, you can customize it the way you want. If we click the X next to that detach, it's just going to close our mixer. Okay, and then we can come back over here and open our mixer. Okay, under that button we have this I/O button. This is going to bring up our inputs and outputs for our audio interface. We talked about that a few sections ago, but if you click it here, you're going to see our song setup page comes up with our inputs and our outputs that we created in the last section. So it's a quick way to get to your I/O screen without having to come up to the file menu at the top of the screen. Underneath that, we have a little wrench here, and this is going to give us some of the similar options that we looked at in the last section, but specific to the console view. So you can go through this and you can play with a lot of this stuff as you want to, and you can uncheck and check things to show things or not show things depending on what you want to do. For example, this thing called Show Channel Notes. If I click on that, you'll see there's a little notepad that opens up underneath the channel strip. And that would be good for something like if I double click in here and I can go take one, or what kind of microphone I was using. So that's kind of handy as well. That's a new feature to Studio One version 4 that wasn't in the prior versions. So that's the wrench. This little symbol down here will expand our mixer to where we can see. Let me stretch this out for you, where you can see all our plugin inserts. Let me just close this note section a little bit. You can see our plugins here. You can see our sends and our inserts. So this is a good view to where if you want to add plugins, you can see it right in here this way. So for example, if I were to take a plugin, and we're going to do more of this later on in this series, but I'm just going to take a plugin, left click, I'm going to drag a delay onto my insert. It automatically opens up here. I'll close this. And now while I'm mixing my song with my faders, I can have instant access to all the plugins I have on that specific track just by clicking on it, double clicking on it, excuse me, and it opens right up for me to tweak to my heart's content. If I just single click on that, and one time it'll bring up some of the more common features on that particular plugin, and you can adjust it from there. To remove a plugin, I'm just going to click on this little arrow and just say remove all, and that will take the plugin away. So that expands your mixer, and the same thing with your sends. Okay, we'll close that back down. This little button over here will make your track in the console either wider or smaller. So if I click on that, it makes it really skinny. See that? And what that's going to allow you to do is, if you have, say, 40 tracks in your session, to put more of them on the view of your screen, you can make these wide tracks or skinny tracks depending on what size computer monitor you're using. This here, if you click the inputs, this is going to show, and you can see my voice coming in on channel 1. If you remember a couple of sections ago where we did our inputs and outputs, we created one input for we're going to be plugging our instruments into. Well, during this whole series so far, you've been hearing me record on the PreSonus M7 microphone that you have in your package, and I'm plugged into channel 1 on my audio interface, and that's why you see the input level here. So this is a quick way for you to see what's going on the incoming signal as you're recording. And again, we'll see that in a couple of sections down the road. If you click the outputs here, and it's all the way over here, we don't have any outputs created right at this moment, but our outputs would be located on this far right side next to our main master fader. Okay. External here, if we had any external pieces of equipment hooked up to Studio One, like we talked about earlier, maybe a fader port or surface control unit, in the keyboard section, when we hook up a MIDI controller, you'll see that here. And again, it's just a quick way to see what you have any external devices you might have hooked up to Studio One. You can see it right here. And as far as instruments go, these are all our VST instruments. I think earlier we did one with Impact, right? We opened up a software instrument here. Let's do that here again, just so you can see that. So let's say we took Impact here, and we just drag it on our edit screen, and it's going to open up our Impact, our drum thing. Now you can see Impact right here. So this is for all virtual instruments. So if you want to see that in your console view here, you can see that. Here it is right here, Impact. It's in this color green here. Let me change that to a different color so you can see it a little easier. Okay, Impact is in blue. If I don't want to see my instrument tracks and I only want to see my audio tracks, you just click like that. You'll see it opens up here. And there's your instrument, and you can always remove it. Okay? Right underneath that, this is your channel list. So here is the list of the types of tracks that you have here. We have Impact here, and that little funny symbol indicates it's an instrument track. And then we have our drum loop here, and that's an audio track. I can show or hide these in the console view, just like I did in the track list in the last section, by clicking on that little dot here. And when I take it out of the console view, it also takes it out of the edit screen. You can see that up here. See the blue Impact? If I click on that, it hides it from the console view. It doesn't delete it, it just hides it from view. And if I click on that again, it will not only bring it back in the mixer view, but it'll also bring it back in the edit screen. Now you can change that and just have it hide in the console, but not in the edit screen. By doing this under the wrench, you can change some of the way you see some of that stuff when you go into your settings. Okay? So let's just close that for a second. So that is the left-hand side of the mixer view. Along the top of the mixer, let's see, we have two tracks here. Our first one is our green track, and that is an audio track. And again, you can tell it's an audio track by looking at this little funny symbol here, this little kind of a audio waveform. That's an audio track. The instrument track has a different symbol to it, so that's how you know the difference. Okay, really simple from the top down. We'll start with our audio track here. We have our inputs here. So right now we have no inputs on our audio loop, our drum loop, but if let's say this was a vocal track that you were going to record vocals on, you can choose the input that you're going to be using on your interface. Right now we have our input 1 selected. We can select that, okay? And then the main outputs, that is where the audio is traveling to, and traveling to the main fader, or the main output fader, which is here on the right hand side. So you can control the inputs and the outputs for each individual track right at the top of the track. Underneath that, we have our panning from left to right here, as you can see. We have the level and the panning position. Okay, so as I move this, you'll see the panning change. If I turn the fader up or down, you'll see this value change. Okay. If I want to bring it right back to 0 or to unity gain, I can just take this, hold down the command key, and click on it. It'll go right back to 0 dB. We have our mute for each channel, our solo for each channel. Underneath that, and let's just choose input 1 here, you can see we have our record enable here, and we also have our monitor button, which we'll talk about when we start recording in a couple of sections down the road. We'll show you what those are used for. Okay, and then that's really it. And then down here at the bottom where we have our track name, we can double click on that, and we can call this drum track if we wish. We can also, we have our little notes here. Remember we talked about our channel notes if we want to have those. And if we left click in the drum track, one little short click, you'll see our color palette comes up, so we can change the color of the track if we want to, which is really nice to have all your tracks color coded so you can easily find them. Okay, so that is the walkthrough, kind of the mixer and the console view. And again, over here we have our fader, our master fader here with all the same controls as we have on our normal tracks. Oh, one other thing too, on each individual track, you see these two little hash marks here. If I click on that, that's going to open up our inserts and our sends where we can put our plugins. Just like if we were to expand our mixer like we talked a few minutes ago, you can put your plugins this way. So it depends on what view you want to work in as you're working. I typically work this way. So when I have my mixer expanded like this, all of my tracks, I can always see my inserts, my plugins, and my effects and my sends. Whereas in this view, if I wanted to add a plugin to say 3 different tracks, I have to click 3 different times, if that makes any sense. But it's all personal preference on the way you choose to work. And then along the bottom here, I guess we can talk while we're here. We have our transport controls along the bottom, pretty standard stuff. You know, we have our time code here. We have our performance meter here. Our performance meter is, we click that, that is going to kind of let us know how our CPU is doing. And a lot of this is based on how many plugins that you're using in your session or how many virtual instruments you have being used in your session. Right now, we only have Impact that we put on a few seconds ago. That's why we're using 4% of our total CPU power. Your performance meter is going to change depending on how many plugins, how many virtual instruments you have, how big your session is, and the performance and the specs of your computer, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So you may want to keep an eye on this as you're building your session, because as it starts creeping up to the 70, 80 percentile, you may start hearing some artifacts, some clicks and pops in your audio, and that typically means that you're just pushing your computer too hard. And there are ways to reduce some of that stuff, and we'll talk about that later. But just so you know, that's the performance monitor down here. We have our time code. Once again, we can scrub through our track here. We have our transport controls here. We have our loop right here. So if we want to create a loop, we come up to the timeline. It turns into like this little pencil tool. We left click and we drag. You can see it's all grayed out right now. But if I click this button at the bottom, it turns into a looping section. So it'll just loop during that section. There's also shortcuts for all of these things to turn the loop on and off. For example, you just hit the Q, the question mark on your, not the Q, the question mark on your keyboard. And you'll see at the top of the screen, the loop will turn off, turn on, turn off, turn on. There you go. So there's the loop. Okay. And then over here, we have down here towards the bottom, we have our tempo over here. We have our timing, our time signature, which you can change. You can change the tempo by clicking in there. You can change the time signature. If you want to turn on your click track or metronome, that's right here. You turn that on. That'll give you a metronome as you start recording, or a click track that you can record to. You have a little wrench next to the metronome. If we were to turn that on, you have some settings along the metronome. What kind of click sounds do you want? What kind of beats do you want? Do you want something on the off beat? Do you want to have a pre-count or a pre-roll? All of your metronome setups are in that little section there when you click the little wrench, and you could turn the metronome on and off by doing this. I can hear it through my headphones right now. You can experiment with that. Okay, so that is our metronome and the metronome setup, which is something you'll use quite a bit. We also have down here another little settings. This is a record panel. If we open and close this, this gives us some more things in the recording mode. And again, these are more advanced features. We're not going to talk about that in this series. This is a beginner series, but I just want to make you aware of what this is. And one thing that I tell a lot of students before I forget is you want to download the manual what comes with Studio One and use it as a reference, because there are so many things, little things in here that no video can possibly show you everything. So again, you want to have the manual handy, but that's where some of these things reside, and you just want to kind of click and open things up and kind of check things out. Okay, and then once again, the open and close the mixer, you just click the mix button and the mixer will be hidden. Okay, and then lastly, and we'll end this video, next to the mixer we have our edit screen here. And what our edit screen is going to do is it's going to bring up a zoomed view of the track that we have highlighted here. So here's our drum track. Okay, so we click on our drum track here, and you're going to see the blow up here of that, and you can see we have a loop selected here. You can zoom in and out down here in the right hand corner. You can take this little slider, you can zoom in and out on your audio. So if you have to do some surgical editing here, you can do that right here. It's an easy way to blow up the audio right in front of you and have a nice big place to work. And again, just like with the main toolbar that we talked about earlier, you have your arrow tool, your range tools. You can come down here and do a range and do some edits. You have your blade tool where you can make some cuts if you chose to. Okay, if you need to do some editing, I'll do Command Z and undo that. So all the same tools that you have up here at the top, they're in the edit screen. You also have down here as you blow up your edit, and the shortcuts work as well. The number 1, number 2, number 3, and you can see it's changing the tools, and those are good things to remember, those hotkeys or shortcut keys. And just like with the console over here on the right hand side, you can detach this and you can put this on a separate screen from your main edit screen as well if you choose to, or you can reattach it and it'll be at the bottom of the edit screen. So that is the editor, the mixer, and all the different functions. So now come on back for the next section, the last section of section 7, where we're going to just take a look at some other things that I think that are important, that'll help you navigate Studio One a little more easily. And I want to show you stuff at the top menu bar here so you can see where you can find other things. But once again, the best thing to do even before you start recording is maybe, take some loops, drag them into your session, into a song file that you really don't care about, is more like kind of your playground, if you will, and start clicking on these different things and get out the manual and start experimenting with the way these things kind of work. That's the best way to really get comfortable, is to just start clicking on things, find out where things are. Most of the things are laid out in a very logical and a very intuitive way. PreSonus has done a wonderful job with Studio One laying out these things in a way that really is fairly easy to understand, but the only way to get really good at it is to really just dive in and start playing around. So I urge you to do that. So come on back for the last section, and I will see you in a couple minutes.